Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer Green and I am the Senior Director of Partnerships and Development at Business and Arts, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm a settler speaking to you from Takaranto. I have the honor to be a guest on the traditional lands and waters of the Petun and Wendat peoples and the Anishinaabeg and Haudenosaunee confederacies, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, as well as many other Indigenous nations, some of whose names are no longer remembered. By saying the names of the original keepers, we remember that this territory continues to be subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and Three Fires Confederacy of the Anishinaabeg to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We acknowledge all who came before us and have traveled the lands and waters of this territory. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work, to live, and to meet on these lands. Today's webinar will be a conversation on strategies for centering the visual arts in thriving societies. We have 1 hour, which will give us ample time for questions and discussion. Only the presenters and moderators will have their microphones on today, so please do submit your questions in the Q&A box and vote for the ones you think are most relevant. In addition to ASL interpretation, you can also turn on auto-generated English and French captions for this webinar. Moderating today's session will be Nancy Noble, Director and CEO of the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. Over the past 30 years, Nancy has worked across Canada in a variety of museum settings, including the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia and the Museum of Vancouver. She is passionate about making museums and galleries more accessible and working with teams to create strong visions that reflect the diversity of our communities. Welcome, Nancy. Thank you for being here. I'll hand things over to you now to get things started.
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome everyone. I hear we have quite a large crowd. I'm joining you from the traditional and unceded territory of Lekwungen people, today known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. I'm really looking forward to moderating today's discussion, and I'm going to get started straight away by introducing our panelists. Darcy Killeen, CEO, Contact Photography Festival. As I've said, he's presently the CEO at the Contact Photography Festival, a position Darcy has held for 21 years. Prior to joining Contact, Mr. Killeen was CFO and Vice President, Finance and Administration at Comnitex Inc., a public company on the TSX. Darcy has held a variety of positions in the technology area, including Chief Financial Officer of Delta Engineering and Controller for Antares Electronics Inc. He also held the position of Associate Director of Arbitrage with Nesbitt Burns in the New York City office. Welcome, Darcy. Mia Nelson is the Director of Art Toronto. Mia leads the creative and strategic development of the fair, bringing together galleries from across Canada and beyond. Exhibitions are supported by talks, events, and year-round VIP programs, inviting audiences to explore, learn, and live with art from a Canadian perspective. Welcome, Mia. And Suying Strang, Executive Director of the Southern Alberta Art Gallery. Now I'm going to try this, Suying, thank you. The Blackfoot pronunciation is Mashutagate Chatabi Shnekson in Sukokotok or Lethbridge, Alberta, based on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Suying's work prioritizes the thoughtful stewardship of artists' practices, accessible programming for audiences, and strong foundations for organizations through a people-centered and community-driven ethos. So welcome to everyone, all of our speakers, and we have a short period of time and I know they have lots to say, so let's get ourselves started. So I'll start with the first question, and what is your perspective on the role of visual arts in our society? And are you an optimist? We could start with you, Mia.
That mute button, it always is elusive. First of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be a part of this conversation with some truly esteemed panelists and a great crowd across the country. So truly a pleasure. And I think that anyone who knows me would recognize that I am most certainly an optimist. I think that, part of what I've so loved about working with art for so long is that it gives us so many entry points into relating to other people. I believe that living with art is a joy, it is a privilege, but I also think it is essential and something that we as members of the community can bring into public space and share with others. And, from my perspective as the director of Art Toronto, part of what makes me so optimistic these days is I have so many interesting conversations with collectors who are increasingly interested in understanding more of the lives of artists, of where they are coming from, with you know, gaining a deeper understanding of how of the messages in the works and learning really and supporting them. I have a lot of conversations with collectors who are very concerned about the rising cost of real estate in the city, and not just Toronto, in Montreal and cities across Canada, what it means for an artist to have access to a viable studio, to a sustainable, living spaces, and how all of these pieces come together in allowing them to continue to tell these stories, and to have this cultural exchange that we support as collectors. Something else that I think is really important about buying art in Canada as a Canadian is that this is our cultural heritage. When we as collectors take a work from an artist studio and of course compensate them appropriately, we are becoming the stewards of our culture. We are ensuring that these future artifacts are cared for, that they are appreciated, they are shared, and through succession planning, that they are appreciated for future generations. So all these reasons and more make me an optimist.
Thanks, Mia. Sue?
Okay, and good afternoon, everyone. Similar to me, I so much gratitude to Business Arts, Nancy for moderating, and esteemed panelist for joining me in conversation today. Really thrilled to hear those first few comments and dig in. I think that I am a frustrated optimist. I think that, things move slowly sometimes, but I'm always hopeful that they're happening eventually and that things are getting better, even if change sometimes feels a bit imperceptible in the moment. I think the optimism really is helped by the incredible people that are in my communities, artists, collaborators, staff, volunteers, obviously family and friends, who I actively see making a difference through the arts. That really drives the optimism for me. My initial response to this question was, wow, of course I am. I'm so lucky to have this job. What an incredible privilege. I love what I do. And with that being the case, I better lead with that optimistic enthusiasm. But I think I also might have some internalized feelings and self-criticism around optimism, and how that might not always help me see or perceive the bad, of which there can be a lot. But really, it might just be that optimist roll with the punches. Am I building or framing a difficult situation or a decision as a failure, as a challenge, or is it an opportunity? Am I an optimist and maybe am I an opportunist? When I consider this optimistic outlook to the role of visual arts in our society, at its best, wholeheartedly agree with so many of the things that Mia shared. Art can connect communities. It can capture our stories and histories, our dreams, our feelings, our ideas. And in these ways, the arts can support social change as well. There was a report in 2019 from the Community Foundations of Canada, their Vital Signs reports on arts and belonging, that showed Canadians who rate arts, culture, leisure in their cities or towns as excellent are 2.8 times more likely to have or report a very strong sense of belonging in their city compared to those who rate the arts as poor. So I think that in one little stat is very telling of how central the arts are to our lives and to our communities. At its worst, the arts can be exclusive. It can feel or be unattainable, out of reach, not for me. I hear that narrative sometimes. But the optimist in me says that the latter, this negative idea and this exclusivity in the arts, is a very stale idea of the past, and that for many across our arts communities today, they're actively working towards something infinitely more accessible to all. And I'm really excited to be a part of that work. Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, Siri. Darcy?
Well said, Suying, and I think my comments are, in line with those. But first, thanks to everybody for, working behind the scenes to make this happen today. It's really been a nice process to get here. I'm an eternal optimist, a very large optimist. But I think in this difficult climate that we're facing in culture right now, it's easy to lose that optimism. And I think at this point in time, it's more important than ever to understand that visual arts play this critical role in society. That more importantly, it's creating this space for creativity, for conversation that we might not otherwise have. And that the arts and the visual arts that we're seeing now are really inspiring people to take action, and allow society to engage in the topics, whether it's environmentalism, identity, Indigenous topics, marginalized communities, whatever it is. But the arts is really driving this, and I find it's more important than ever. And I think arts and the visual arts are really the archive of society's memories, and we need to build these archives, work on these archives, and continue to build this foundation for us and for the future.
Thanks, Darcy. Suying or Mia, or anyone have anything else they'd like to comment on in terms of what your other panelists said on this question? I love that you're all optimists. It gives me hope, a lot of hope.
I'm a diminishing optimist, though, potentially. Looking for
like
that optimism.
Too. Anyone? All good?
It was great.
Okay. So the second question is, how are you building support for work you do within your community? Are people coming back to your gallery, your festival, your fair? And we'll start with you this time, Darcy.
Thank you. I think, at Contact, the photography festival, our audience is down significantly from before COVID. And, the return is there, but we're maybe still at 50% of that. And I think there's other reasons as well. I think, in today's economic climate, it's much more expensive to go and experience, the arts. And it's, maybe much easier to stay at home and watch Netflix. But Contact is very focused on continuing to deliver, pretty much this entirely free platform, and to make it as accessible, like I think it was Suying that mentioned accessibility. It's so important that we grow accessibility for the visual arts and make it easy for people. And, Contact does that through all of our amazing partnerships and all of our museums and artist-run centers and galleries and cafes and public spaces, but also, the public art that we put out there. It is a massive program that we undertake every year. A couple of billboards went up on College Street last night. It was the first to see, which was really exciting and great. Yeah, but I think, these shared resources are of critical importance going forward.
Thanks, Darcy. Could we, someone said they were having a hard time hearing you. If you, next time you speak, could maybe turn up your volume, or that would be great.
That's a first.
Suing.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Darcy. So a big focus at the gallery right now is on actively expanding our communities by inviting in historically underserved communities and also forming new partnerships with organizations who are already connected to these folks. With a smaller team, we don't necessarily have the expertise internally to work meaningfully with several new communities who might have diverse needs. So partnerships have really been critical in that regard. Newer partners like Lethbridge Family Services, Alberta Health Services, they're bringing people into the fold and collaborating on programs and bringing other expertise to work alongside our team, whether it's interpreters and translators, mental health professionals, social workers, et cetera, to help us do what we want to do and help us better serve audiences. Along with these explicit invitations, and I do think if you haven't invited in or a community hasn't felt welcomed at your space in a really long time, that active invitation is absolutely critical. So alongside those invitations, we're working on creating more access points throughout our program. I want to say that I believe we have a very sophisticated audience that is interested or actively engaged in the arts of all ages, of all backgrounds. I remember a comment that really sticks out earlier in my career was when one of my pals was lamenting about how their boss was talking with disdain about how they felt creating programming for children and youth was pandering. I mean, come on, these are our future artists, these are our future community leaders, these are our current audiences. It's anything but pandering. It's nurturing interest, curiosity, and a love for the arts from a young age. It's critical work. And so with that, I've always thought about these access points as what are we really doing? We're translating, we're interpreting, we're articulating relevance, and we're learning how to connect with different folks. What are you doing to help interpret the art that you're programming across different audiences? One show is going to mean so many different things to so many different people. And there's ways that you can connect and bring in that connection and that relevant connection to them by the ways that you're creating and organizing how they're investigating a show or investigating an opportunity to connect with others through the arts. Are you being a good host? It's about one size fits one, and it's relational, connecting person to person, which in turn helps them connect to the arts. An example of this recently, it was Ramadan recently. We were hosting a group from Lethbridge Family Services, and one of our programmers, Bare Ipa, knew that there were several Muslims in the group, so he converted our library into a temporary prayer room for the duration of the program to make the space more comfortable and more culturally appropriate during their visit. And it's these types of competencies come from taking the time to have a relational approach, which in turn gifts us with specific knowledge, which in turn allows us to better serve our communities. Our audiences from pre-2020 to that part of the question have not fully come back, but they're changing and they're growing. And I've been grateful for the leadership that we've seen from Alberta Arts Funders undertaking research with Stone Olafson on arts audiences across the province. Shout out to Rose Foundation for taking the lead on that project. But we know that 36% of survey respondents are attending less than before the pandemic, with 20% of that figure saying much less. To Darcy's point, 76% of Albertans cite financial reasons as why they're attending less. 49% cite they're not comfortable anymore, whether that's comfort with crowds or being worried about getting sick. So there's some critical I was about to say pivot. I did say pivot. There's some critical work we have to do to address these current present day concerns. And yes, it's about offering free programming. Yes, it's about offering digital options like this. But ultimately, it's also just about meeting folks where they're at, extending that warm invitation continually, and also continually learning about what it means to be good hosts to different audiences.
Thank you. Mia?
So many great comments so far, my goodness. I would say I'm gonna build on some of the things that Su Yang was saying in particular. We are also doing quite a bit of outreach, which is new for the fair, not something that was done pre-pandemic. So I'm in Montreal today, and we are hosting events for audiences in different cities across the country. You know, I think it's really important to connect with people in you know, directly, to speak about the work that we're doing at the fair, to and to, you know, to build those audiences back. I am in a fortunate position where, you know, we have at the fair seen pre-pandemic audiences return in 23, and you know, also building to 24. I mean, I think that what is interesting about an art fair is that it is an incredible opportunity, a very unique opportunity in Canada to connect with this very large number of artist works and galleries. So we have 110 galleries that join us from across Canada and around the world. And that, you know, it is a unique opportunity to see how Canadian artists and increasingly Indigenous artists are centered within a global conversation around the visual arts. Also, like, in addition to these events that we do throughout the year to kind of build this audience to come to Toronto in October, you know, we are also increasingly hosting different kinds of events during the fair. So these are opportunities for you know, all kinds of different folks to come to the show and, you know, perhaps experience the show through different experts' eyes, opportunities for clients to entertain groups at the fair, to connect with our galleries, and, you know, always to encourage acquisition, encourage people to live with art. And I think, you know, that is really the message of an art fair. And it was exciting to see this also be, you know, part of the story here in Montreal at Plural a couple weekends ago, where again, you know, the corridors of the fair were just packed on a Saturday afternoon with you know, folks of all walks of life, you know, of multi-generations, taking in the work, asking questions, learning about art in Canada.
Thanks, Mia. Just as a follow-up to that question, I think everyone mentioned about building back audiences. And I think that's really, it's one of the measures that we use for success, because of course we want to make sure we can share with as many people as possible. But just briefly to each of the panelists, what other ways do you see yourself as being successful beyond just building back audiences? Sorry, this isn't on your script, but but you brought up a good point, Mia, at the end about you know, what you're doing. So maybe we could start with you.
Sure. I think that, I mean, I would say that, first of all, like, I mean, the way that we work is, okay, so one of the things I really like about this panel is that you're getting three very different perspectives, right? Each cultural organization has a very different way of working. So, you know, I can only speak to, you know, the work that my team, you know, does here to run the fair. So I would say, you know, in terms of success prospects, we're looking for a diversity of galleries. We're looking for galleries that are representing young, emerging artists. It's always really exciting to see artists participate in the fair who have never had an opportunity to do so before. But we're also looking for the Riopelle paintings, the Jack Bush paintings, those, like, you know, Canadian masterworks, the Emily Carr paintings. Like, these are the works that, you know, again, kind of like fall into that cultural heritage, but also are such an important draw for our audiences. I'm always interested in bringing together, like, different kinds of stories for various conversations at the fair. One of our kind of signature programs that we've developed since the pandemic is our Curators in Conversation program in 2022. That brought Cecilia Alemani to Toronto to talk about the Venice Biennale. And that was a really important year for the biennial or the Biennale, forgive me, because Shuvana Yashuna, a really important artist from Kinnight, had a special mention at the fair. This was a huge moment for Canadian art. And so that's also part of what I mean about, the centering of Canadian art, this Canadian perspective within a global context.
Thanks, Mia. Su Ying, you want to just respond to that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, great points on the different strategies from different organizational models for sure, Mia. And for the question, I love it because we're so often asked to fill out our stat forms and all of that, which really is just pulling that quantitative data and metrics for success. So thank you for raising this, because there's certainly so many qualitative pieces to that as well. We have this conversation on our programming team quite a bit of, what programs is it appropriate to have 10 participants versus what programs is it appropriate to have, like on this call, 200 participants.
Yeah.
There is the kind of quality of conversation, of relationship building that can happen at a smaller scale, which can be just as valuable to both the audience member, the staff, the artist, etc. That is critical. It's super, super critical for us to acknowledge having the kind of room and space for people to engage in all sorts of ways. Also the different types of stakeholders, like, yes, we want to make sure great customer service, great support for our audience members. We also want to make sure that staff feel supported and safe and happy in their workplace. We also want to make sure that board members and volunteers feel actively engaged in what they do. And critically, we want to make sure that artists feel like we've properly stewarded and supported their practices through the programming that we do. So it's balancing and making sure that each member of our team is working with a stakeholder, whether internal, external, large or small, and it's about making sure that we are prioritizing that relationship and thinking about how we have a quality connection with folks. I'll pause there. Thanks.
Thanks, Su Ying. Darcy, any comments?
Yeah, sure. At Contact, I think, it's critical for us to create opportunities for artists. And if I think of our open exhibition program, this year there's over 100 exhibitions. These are, fourth year university students at Sheridan or OCAD or TMU. This is their first exhibition. This is their first exposure to exhibiting their artwork to the world. And they're doing it side by side, in the same program as some of the most important Canadian and international artists in the world. And I think it's something that is very important, that there continues to be support for these, young and emerging artists. I think, educational programming at Contact is also at the core of everything we do, is not just presenting, artwork, but also providing free education, how to make a photo book, how to print a photograph, how to curate an exhibition. All of these are taught at Contact to our audience, for free. And it's something that I think is critical to give that support, to build up, these young artists. Going back to our public art program, especially during the pandemic, we substantially increased it. We took artwork from outside the White Cube and wrapped buildings, put it on billboards, put it everywhere. And really made it accessible in a way that people, felt safe, especially during the pandemic, to go see this, could do it on their time with their comfort levels. And then also taking that work and not just having it in the downtown core, but to expand into all the new neighborhoods and to expand into neighborhoods that, that don't have the galleries, that don't have these spaces, for creativity. And not just, outside the GTA, but, across Canada. When we go, sometimes our billboards go from Vancouver to St. John's. And I think all of these things together really create, that platform.
Great, thanks. Okay, so on to the last question, and then we'll get to the Q&A. So how should those of us working in the visual arts position what we do better to better advocate for support, whether from donors, sponsors, or government? How do we most effectively use economic and social arguments to build support? And we'll start with you, Sue Ying.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So the economic and social impact pieces have been well documented, and I won't bore you with stats on this one, this particular question, unless you want me to, then say so in the chat. All I'll say is that there are great organizations like Business Arts who are doing the research and publishing reports to support this content, this data. So take advantage of these resources. Again, we've been really lucky here in Alberta to have this arts audience research recently, part 1 of 6 just being published in the winter. And for more national perspectives as well, it's able to connect nationally, locally, regionally through all of this data to support our work. So what I want to focus on, though, is going back to the idea of a translation and a relational approach. So we know, we've discussed, arts are a core part of the broader systems of civic life and communities. The arts are connected with and impact all other nodes of the system. We're not a standalone, separate entity. And to best advocate for support, I really think it's about translating what we are doing to best articulate the impact and relevance to those we seek support from. There's a connection there, just you have to think a little bit about it and articulate it. So meeting folks where they're at and taking that time to translate, no matter how obvious it seems, sometimes it just is a matter of sitting down and spelling it out together and figuring out how the work you're doing is supporting and is connected to the work that they're doing. It's all about bridging. It's all about finding that common ground because there always is something. It's about identifying shared strategic priorities, and it's also can be about identifying a values alignment with these stakeholders. We don't need to focus on competing or articulating why the arts are more important or working from a scarcity mindset. More so, I feel it's really important that we need to articulate why the arts are part of the solution for the priorities of today across the board, across the different sectors. And this brings me back to the importance of partnerships. Partners can help us look outside of ourselves and articulate the roles that we are each playing in building communities together. And it also presents a really, really, I find, exciting and exceptional opportunity to do things differently and to come up with ideas, to come up with programs, advocacy methods, and solutions that are only possible when you come together. So I'm a big proponent for that collaborative approach, for bringing as many different minds to the table as possible, because you're going to end up somewhere far different from where you started if you were to have that conversation alone in your office. So yeah, really excited for the power of partnerships.
Thank you. Darcy?
Well, Su Ying said everything I wanted to say, probably much more eloquently. But just to elaborate, I think really, working collaboratively and sharing resources is critical. Every artistic organization is strapped for resources. So working together and sharing those, and that has made Contact, this largest photography festival in the world is all these partnerships and all these collaborators and everybody doing it, and all these organizations support us with resources, with funds, with artists, with all of these things. But one thing, I think when we're looking for supports, many organizations, including Contact, have to reinvent themselves financially every year and find new resources every year. It's a continuous effort. But when I think of like the models of Canada Council or the Ontario Arts Council, that, once you are with them, that you receive, a longer term commitment. And I think that is of critical importance. It makes you feel safer in your environment. But it also allows you to do things over a longer period of time, to not just have a conversation that begins and has to end, and then you walk away from whoever you're working with, but allows that conversation to continue for a much longer period of time. And I think that's something that we really need to advocate for, that, that there is longer term funding, and also that maybe different stakeholders can come together and provide larger amounts of funding. And then I think the other thing that we need to continuously advocate for and let people know is that, you know, culture is what makes a great city. You know, if you think of Paris or Berlin or Tokyo or Madrid or wherever, you know, and Toronto is one of these world-class cities now. It really is. It's culture that builds on these. And when I talk about, you know, my diminishing optimism, I think some of that is happening, you know, not just in Toronto, but in North America. I think it's less affected in other parts of the global world, but really affected here. But I don't think, I have full faith that Torontonians, Ontarians, and Canadians will understand this and come back to culture and support it and allow Toronto to continue to thrive as, you know, one of the greatest cities in the world.
There's that optimist in you, Darcy.
It's gonna come out sometime.
Mia.
Sure. So I think, you know, something that we've seen, you know, globally over the last couple of decades is that art buying, particularly for those who are new to the market, but not exclusively, that the market is really driven by events, you know, events like fairs. And, you know, Art Toronto is the most significant art market event in the country, contributing to the livelihoods of galleries that, you know, create platforms to support artists and, you know, contributing to the livelihoods of literally hundreds of artists. So I think that those direct benefits are very clear. And I think I'm going to echo some of the things that Suying and Darcy are saying around partnership, because I think that communicating these significance of all of our organizations and how they all come together to support a national network of supporting art and artists is really important. I think that, you know, diversifying funding options for institutions, festivals, galleries is really essential. And, you know, I started this role in 2019 with the pandemic. I feel like I've learned so much and I'm learning more every year. And, you know, something that I think this information sharing is so important. Like, you know, I was recently made familiar with some of the programs of the Business Development Bank of Canada. And I was like, this is amazing. Like how is it that our galleries are not familiar with what some of these programs are and how they could contribute to their expansion? And you know, when I talk about their expansion, what I'm talking about is like, you know, the reach of their programs and their artists across Canada, but also globally. And I think, you know, the more that we can do as the art loving public in Canada to support visual artists, to ensure that visual artists have the opportunity to remain in Canada, that their works remain in Canada as they are enjoying, experiencing, advocating for global expansion in their works. I'm thinking about, you know, artists like Sarah Swinar or Marcel Zama as two very different examples, you know, two important Canadians who left Canada a long time ago to develop careers in the States. Like the more that we can do to connect Canadians with the importance of their work here, the more the richer that our entire society will be.
Thanks, Mia. So that ends the questions I have for the panelists, and now we'll take your questions from the audience. Just a reminder to please post your questions in the Q&A box. We have about 15-ish minutes left, so we'll get to as many of them as we can. And I will start from Jane Brindley. As technology makes it increasingly easy to replicate visual art, how do we ensure an appropriate balance between accessibility and authenticity and the artist's intellectual property? So, any one of your panelists like to take that one on? Or all of you?
That's a delicious question.
All right, go for it.
Yeah. I'm gonna riff for a minute. So, you know, panelists interrupt me if you think, if you know, I would say that number one, that I mean, that is it is an important question. I think in a sense, it's also an age-old question. I would think that this is something that cultures you know, kind of grappled with as printing became more popular, as particularly in the 20th century, as like, you know, posters became popular. And, you know, I, like so many people, you know, grew up with a poster of a George O'Keeffe painting on my bedroom wall. And it was a genuine touchstone of inspiration, you know, to 15-year-old me. And I think that we, as cultural producers, we can help communities find a balance of that dissemination of images, and also creating these connections with the genuine work, right? Because like as inspiring as that was to have that at home, to, you know, to go into museums for the first time and you know, confront those works in person, you know, the depth of that experience was so much more. I do want to, you know, as I'm thinking about this, I think that possibly this person is also inferring about AI, which is like a whole other conversation. I want to acknowledge that that may be part of that question. I don't think we're qualified to talk about it right now, but I don't want to shut anybody down, so go for it.
I definitely don't feel qualified to talk about the AI component, but maybe I'll talk about the paying artists component, which I think is a critical part of recognizing that intellectual property. And, you know, I was really happy to see April's team over at Carfax National putting together virtual exhibition fees, KDAC team noting those on their stat sheet for virtual programming and exhibitions and things like this, where we start to see and build into our budgets that these are things that we need to be compensating artists for, if this is the primary way that we're disseminating their work, or one of the many ways we're disseminating their work. So I think advocating for and partnering with organizations that are continually advocating for the professional treatment of artists and the payment of artists and supporting that wholeheartedly as cultural institutions is one way to recognize that, and work towards a bit of that balance that Jane has asked in the question, hopefully. It's one component of it, at least.
Darcy?
I already forgot what the question was, unfortunately, but no, I think, you know, I think what Seeing said, and, you know, is paying artists and paying them and following Carfax here in Canada is, you know, is of critical importance, and really that, you know, is the value to the particular artist. And but if I'm recalling the question correctly, you know, the fact that people, you know, copying or, you know, can't remember what the word was, but I think that's always happened in society, you know, not just in the arts, but in every place. And I think, you know, what differentiates an artist from somebody that's just doing something, whether, you know, I don't want to dismiss AI or anything, but, you know, a true artist is somebody that works on a body of work for their entire life. It's not just a one-off thing. It is, you know, a passion that grows and builds. You know, I just think of somebody like Moderator, who, you know, started with, you know, Dutch landscapes and ended up with these crazy abstractions, but it was a lifetime of work to get to do all of that. And that's, you know, the value of a true artist. And I don't know if I've lost topic of the question, so I apologize to the question asker, but those are my comments.
Thank you. So next question. Artist production space is critical. Without space, artists can't create. What role do you see your organization playing in fostering and developing spaces for artists to work?
I can start that one.
Sure.
I think it's obviously of critical importance, and I think I'll give two different examples. I think of just Toronto, and what's happened in Toronto is, the art spaces have been decimated and, pushed out away from the core, and, where people could work together and collaboratively, now they can't. They're in small spaces all over, and not just in Toronto, they're, like going all the way to Hamilton or going all over the place to find these spaces is incredibly difficult. The building that I'm in, 80 Spadina, 40 years ago, if you wanted to go to galleries and see artists, you came to this place. There was 30 different galleries in this building. Now there's one. That's just the way the world is. And that's one side. But as soon as you said that, I thought of artist Jake Kimball from the West Coast, who now lives in Vancouver. But he was just up in his hometown, and the name is, excuse me, I can't remember it, but in the Northwest Territories. And when he was there, he went and shot his entire body of work for the exhibition he just opened in Toronto a couple of weeks ago. And the exhibition is about returning home, and his entire, 94% of his town was burned down in the fires. But, he made the comment to me, there are no studios up here. Like, I had no way to work on my work when I was up there, and what he did was he took, fortunately, his father's garage did not burn down. And, there's tractors in there, and that's where he was working at night. And there's no facility, there's absolutely nothing. And, so I think in Toronto, it's really hard. And obviously outside of the big, cities, it's impossible.
Thanks. I just, if we could have brief responses from the other two panelists, just so we can get to a third question. So Ying,
I'm happy to go. Sure.
Yeah.
Definitely a very different perspective being in a smaller urban center here. One of the things that I was so excited about and attracted to, coming from a visual artist background myself, moving to Secaucus or Lethbridge, Alberta, was right next door to the gallery, actually, besides the fact that I long admired the Southern Alberta Art Gallery, was CASA, which is run by the Allied Arts Council of Lethbridge, right next door to our facilities here. And it is an incredible production space for the most nominal cost, like a couple, maybe no more than $200 annually. Wood shop, ceramics studio, printmaking, Weavers Guild. It's honestly such an incredible space, and it's multidisciplinary. They have a black box studio, they have a dance studio. The university partners with them to have the music conservatory there. So I think we're quite lucky in this town to have some really incredible creation space, as well as, although affordability, as we heard from some of my stats earlier in Alberta, it's a crisis here as well. In smaller urban centers, there's still a level of affordability for, getting a home with a spare room or a detached garage to be able to access space to create. And for some of those bigger creation needs, having organizations who are taking the lead on providing that. And I was so grateful that our city invested in that space, gosh, about 10 years ago, because it really makes a huge difference for artists to have a place not only to access some of the more expensive equipment and utilize that in their practice, but also just to be able to connect with others who are creating. Coming out of school, I went to Alberta University of the Arts, or then ACAD. The first maybe 5 or 6 years from graduation, I was in studio collectives because I wanted to be around other folks who were creating. It was the Bakery and then Avalanche ICA were the two studio collectives I was a part of. And that was a huge part of my practice in those early days, was being able to connect with others in a shared creation space. So in terms of the Southern Alberta Art Gallery, I mean, we do residencies, we provide production dollars. Residencies are taking place mostly in the Crow's Nest Pass at the Gushel Studios that's run by the university. But we often take advantage of partnerships, like with the university for their Gushel studio space, and creation funds, production funds for folks that are exhibiting with us. But I wholeheartedly agree, the production support and the space in particular is critical, especially in these larger urban centers.
Mia,
I'll be real brief though. Okay. I think partnership is so important here. I want to take a moment and just shout out the good work that Akin does in Toronto. They have hundreds of studio spaces in a number of buildings across the city. And just kind of speaking to some of my past work as curator of the Drake, I mean, that we had an ongoing program for many years where we would invite, it was a very small number, like 1 or 2 artists in to take advantage of studio space for a duration of time. I think that, you know, this organization, you know, bridging business and art, I mean, I encourage, you know, anyone who has a business, who has space, who, you know, is interested in creative enterprise, that we can all be a part of this solution. And I do think it is a community where we can come together and share space and create opportunities for artist studios. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks. So we only have a few minutes left, but I'm going to ask one more question and just ask each of the respondents to take less than a minute to answer it if you could. So how are you communicating impact to your audiences? What are some of the ways we can meaningfully do this? It's a great question from an anonymous.
Great question.
Anyone want to jump in?
I can measure impact by the amount of artists that we provide a service to the amount of exhibitions that we have, to the amount of educational programming that we provide, to the amount of, you know, public installations and artwork projects we can provide. I can quantify and identify with the amount of press that we get. You know, last year we got 2 billion impressions from 162 countries, covering pretty much all of our artists. So in under a minute, that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Suying, do you have any answer to this question, or would you like to comment?
Sure, I'll try to keep it brief, because absolutely, you know, we do an annual report. A lot of the quantitative data is captured in there. I think more speaking to the qualitative piece that I was harping on earlier, maybe I'll just say something about storytelling on social media and using some of those platforms. We have a great new digital coordinator, Kels Delamarter, who has been really focusing on the people behind the work. And we heard Mia speak earlier about collectors really wanting to know the artists behind the work and learn more about them. And that's what we've been focusing on for both artists and staff, for more of the qualitative storytelling piece, to help audiences understand who and how and what they're connecting to.
I love this question because it's something that I think about as well, and I guess it's part of why I don't have like a quick answer for it. I think that, you know, from our perspective of the fair, that is something that that I'm looking to refine and communicate with audiences, you know, beyond our social channels, our email channels, and the events that we do. So it's a work in progress.
Great, thanks everyone. So that's all the time we have now for questions. And I just want to thank everyone. It's been a great hour spending with you. I'm going to pass the microphone back over to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Just a huge thank you to all of you on the panel, Darcy, Mia, and Suying, for contributing your insights and your optimism, and for answering questions from the audience today. I think you all articulated so beautifully the importance of partnership and how arts organizations can work together in a network that supports artists and build that art-loving public that we all want to see here in Canada and around the world. We really appreciate your openness and your generosity in sharing your experiences. Nancy, thank you so much for leading and moderating an excellent discussion today. I also want to give a very sincere thank you to Power Corporation of Canada, who are our presenting partner for the Business Arts Speaker Series for the next 3 years. And if you want to learn anything else about the business arts programs and events, please head to our website for more information or follow us on social media. Many thanks to everyone who came today. It was just wonderful to see so many people participating and in the chat today. So thank you all and have a wonderful day.